Hello, welcome. Feel free to grab a name tag and all right, I'm gonna get started. So today we're going to be talking about scene and understanding scene. So over the last few sessions, we've been building characters, building our understanding of some of our different interactive techniques. And now we're going to try to understand how to put these things together in scene. So really, just first, we need to understand, the goal of doing some of this work is so that when we're building a scene, that we understand this kind of bisociative model, right? So in interactive theater, we have the diegetic aspects or your character-driven aspects, which are kind of your mechanical, your physical manifestation, your present, which is how you're giving focus and energy, your monitor, which is how you're receiving information, this is where the consciousness starts to split, and then the orchestrator, which is this meta observer that's kind of holding all the different devising possibilities and can make things up on the fly and move in different directions. And the goal of that is so that we can do something called steering. So steering is a concept that was first introduced in 2015. The art of steering, it defines the concept as the process by which a player influences the behavior of their character for non-diegetic reasons. So this is something that happens both with people who are both our guests within an interactive performance, but especially with our actors in an interactive performance. So a little bit more about steering. So steering is a process by which a player influences their behavior of their character for non-diegetic reasons, or we can say an actor in this case influences the behavior of their character for non-diegetic reasons. Most of the time during like a LARP runtime, or in our case, an interactive theater runtime, people have a dual consciousness of looking at the events both as diegetic, which is in-world, and non-diegetic, which is not in-world. So as play and non-play. So this dual consciousness or bisociation informs most of their actions. It's an important part of playing and games, staying with one foot in the border of play and another outside of it. It can not only be powerful, but very instructive. So this is very much the goal of what we're trying to do when we are in scene with people. We're trying to both understand why the scene is taking place for non-diegetic reasons, and then help the scene to take place for those diegetic reasons, right? So what is scene? So scene is a section really of an overall story that contains its own unique combination of setting, character, dialogue, and sphere of activity. So the way that we are interacting, it's just a section in a story that has its own kind of cadence. So in interactive theater, scenes are always reciprocal and multilateral, which means they always involve relationships. You're never going to go have a scene in interactive theater by yourself, because there's no point. There's no way to have a monologue because there's no audience to watch you. The audience are participating with you. So scenes always have to have this character of having relationships. So developing the orchestrator, so questions that you want to ask yourself when you're in a scene are, who is involved in the scene? Why is the scene taking place? What is being learned in the scene and by whom? And these are probably multi-layered answers, right? There's lots of different learnings that are happening for different characters in the scene. How will the scene impact things going forward? And then is there a payoff for any setup that is happening in the scene? What is it? And how will it be accomplished? So these are all things to kind of ground you in the scene so that you understand just the why this is taking place. Why both from like your character's perspective and why from like this larger, high level view perspective of, what's going on, why this is taking place. And then the next really important concept to understand is the concept of spotlight. So to understand what makes a good scene, we also need to understand this concept. So in interactive theater, it's critical to know really when it's your turn to be in the spotlight and when it's your turn to support others as they're stepping into the spotlight. So spotlight is not just important for your scenes with other characters, but for your scenes with guests as well. So you want to make sure that those interactions that you feel this understanding of balance of when they're in spotlight and when you're in spotlight. So in developing your orchestrator, you're going to want to ask some different questions about spotlight. Who is talking? And for how long are they talking? If I'm in a one-on-one scene, a good rule of thumb is that you want to be talking about 50% of the time, and the other person should be talking the other 50% of the time. Am I taking up space? And this is kind of like a nebulous concept, but it's this idea of literally we have energy and spotlight and this focus and attention. When that's happening, people are taking up space. So the idea behind asking this question is, if I'm not taking up space and I feel like it's my turn to take up space, how can I step forward in order to take up that space? Or how can I step back if I'm finding that I'm taking up too much space? And just noticing when you're taking up space is really important and critical to being able to do this work effectively. When someone else is talking, am I listening? This is super critical in this work. If you are only half-heartedly listening, waiting for your turn to give the why or talk or drive or direct the scene, it's not a mutual scene, it's not reciprocal, and we're not achieving what we want from scene. And if I'm talking, could anyone else be saying what I'm saying? And could it be a guest? And could I enable a guest to do this instead of me doing it? So these are really critical questions to like think about and ask yourself as you start to develop this sense of spotlight. These questions are also really useful to have in your mind in any conversation, right? Like as we're just moving about life, understanding that spotlight is also a part of your daily interactions with people is important. And then the last concept is understanding emotional energy. So the flow of a scene is greatly aided by having a good understanding of a scene's emotional energy. So this is really closely related to the concept of tone. So I made an analogy here to something like music. So most scenes have a cadence to them, which is much like music, where you know if a song is sad, you know if a song is jubilant, you know if a song is rousing and inspiring. There are these different sort of emotional tones that happen in music, and scenes are like that too. So they start out a little more simply usually, then they build, and then they usually reach a dramatic shift or some sort of peak in the song. That shift becomes a moment of a revelation, and it fuels the conclusion of that scene and the musical piece as well. So different emotions are used like different tones or instruments to create these layers, to create beautiful layers and to create dramatic tension. And so knowing what you want out of each scene, and I like to use this music analogy for myself, I find it useful. There's plenty of other things that you could use, like using any other art forms that you find like, comparable, I think is a really great way to start thinking about these things. Like if you're a painter, maybe think about, the how you outline a scene and then you start to layer in paint and then you start to build these different things. That, but with emotions, right? So we're trying to associate our emotions with how we're going to actually construct a scene. So when you're developing your orchestrator, these questions to ask about emotional energy. So what are the emotions that I'm trying to convey? Why are these important? Why are these important to the scene? Why are these important to my character? This is a little bit of psychology, a little bit of psychological work that we need to do with our characters to figure out why these emotions are important. How will I prioritize them? This is more of a question for the actor. How am I going to prioritize? Maybe I want to have a scene that is both funny and sad, but in what measure? Do I want it to be mostly funny and a little sad, or do I want it to be mostly sad and a little funny? How am I going to prioritize these different emotions? And how will I know if I'm succeeding? Am I going to judge that based off of the audience's reaction? What kinds of cues am I looking for? How am I going to know whether or not I'm succeeding? What do I want the scene to feel like? What do I want my song to sound like, right? Is it something inspiring? Is it something jubilant? Is it something, is it a funeral dirge? Like, what is it? What are we trying to make out of that scene? And how will I meet and match the energy of the guests? So people come in with different energies. It's very useful to be able to match them at the energy level that they're at, and then start to move them as you move your character into a different emotional space. So how am I going to bring them with me as things change in the scene? So we're going to practice some different techniques for doing this. We're going to do just some different workshop exercises. So the first exercise we're going to do is something called expanded presence. And this is something a little bit more like a guided meditation. And the goal of this exercise is to start to get comfortable with this idea that we have this sort of emotional resonance that we can play with, that we can actually use that in order to convey scene. And that starts with understanding your own presence. So we're going to start just by, actually, since we're in kind of like the exercise portion of this, I'm going to pause. Actually, no, since this is guided meditation, I think I'll just keep it on as we're doing this. Okay, so everybody sit comfortably. Just a nice comfortable way to sit, both feet grounded, hands in a comfortable resting position. And then you're going to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, you're just going to draw your attention to your own body and start to feel what's going on internally. If you notice anything physically that's happening internally, maybe a little tension in your shoulders, any pinching in your neck, how does your head feel on your shoulders? Feeling kind of the weight of your arms, where they're resting on your body, any places where you are making contact with yourself, feeling that contact and presence. And start to think of this wholeness of your body as your awareness. And then I want you to very slowly start to move that awareness outside of your own physical body, just an inch, like a sphere that's expanding around you. Just go 1 inch outside of yourself. And then with your next breath in and out, expand it out just another inch. And then just continue to expand that awareness out, inch by inch, with each breath coming in and out. And as you do, take note of the new sensations that you're starting to feel. You should already start to have an awareness of other beings that are within that sphere. Start to think of them less as separate beings from you, but totally connected to you. You are one and the same. You are interdependent. And now start to expand that sense of awareness and that sense of presence as far outside of yourself as you can. Start to expand your presence until you can fill this entire room. And as you do, start to notice different sensations that you might be experiencing. Maybe you become more aware of the humming of the lights. Maybe you become more aware of the smells in this room. Maybe you become more aware of the feeling of the carpeting under your feet. Maybe you start to become aware of noises that you can hear even further beyond the boundaries of this room. And if you're having trouble expanding that presence outward, you need to ask yourself, what's getting in the way? Getting in the way of that presence expanding outward. And just sit in this expanded presence, in this fullness, for a few moments longer. And then slowly start to contract that presence back, inward, inch by inch, breath by breath, until it reaches back to just the lines of your body. And when you do so, and you're back fully just in your own body, go ahead and open your eyes. Great. So I'm going to pause our recording. Come over here. Okay, so the next exercise is this emotional mirror. I'm going to make some breakout rooms for everybody. All right, find a place where you're coming to a stop in the next couple of seconds here. All right, we've got everybody back. Welcome back. All right, so our next exercise is probably going to take kind of the majority of our time. And this is semi-dependent on the idea that we've been building these characters over the course of the last several weeks. So if you don't have a character, then this might be a little bit harder to participate in. So, or if you have a character, then great, we can get to know your character really fast. But in this exercise, actors are going to pass around a real or metaphorical, in our case, we're going to use a metaphorical ball of yarn and suggest relationship dynamics. So the starting person has the ball of yarn in their hands and they'll hand it to another person and suggest how their character feels about that other person's character. That person then accepts that ball of yarn and they can have any like tweaks or modifications if there's things that are, for their comfort. And then they reply with how their character feels about the other person's character. So we want to make at least 3 connections. And one of those connections at least should be very supportive, very mutually positive relationships. Even villains need supporters. We need at least one positive connection on stage for all of our characters. And don't make completely negative relationships. Conflict is okay, but it should be something that's building and not tearing down. Something that's, kind of tension that is, we've got somewhere to go with it, not destructive. Does all that make sense? Yeah. Okay, great. Folks in your breakout rooms, I know that there's only a couple of you, so you're not going to have it won't take you long to make these relationships. So I'll just go ahead and open these breakout rooms. Cool stuff. Now we're going to do this exercise. Pointers. Cool. Like Chelsea will talk. Okay, so next week we're going to start putting this all together, and I also am going to give everybody some tools and tricks and tips for safety, things that you can use, but first of all, that your production should be using in order to make sure that you have healthy boundaries that are being recognized, tools and tips for getting into and getting out of character so that you can create a safe container around this type of work. And tools for getting out of sticky situations with guests. Sometimes you have moments with disagreeable guests or people who are not playing along in a way that we want to engage with. Some techniques for being able to get out of those situations, redirect energy, and things like that. And then we'll put it all together with a little bit of scene work. So we'll start coming up with some different scenarios and running some group scenarios together and doing all of that. We do not have the library next week. So I have an alternate location for us, which I will email out to everybody. But I can tell it to you verbally right now.
Is it in this area or is it?
It is in Orlando, Florida. So it is 310 North Orange Avenue. So I think
Okay, yeah, that's
pretty close to here. Right?
the only way.
It's
We can go to school.
Oh, it's 5 minutes from here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's right around the corner from here. The parking situation is we'll probably have to find street parking in the area or find a parking garage nearby and then walk there. I'll email everybody the details of that as well. Just because the library is closed next week, so we won't have the space, but we also won't have the humming of the electric light. So that'll be lovely.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am.
Of course. Thank you all. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks.
And do some homework. Practice your expanded presence homework. You can just do that for 5 minutes a day. And practice asking questions, like asking those questions that we were looking at about scene and spotlight and emotional energy in your everyday life.
Yeah. Can we get the slides for today too?
You bet. Absolutely. I will email those out to everybody along with the updated location information for Orlando folks.
Sounds great.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks.